let's shift gears now and talk about what's near and dear to my heart as well. The Society of Biblical Literature commentary on the Septuagint, Genesis commentary.
Sure.
So you mentioned, of course, that you and Cameron are have been chosen as the head of the project. So can you just give us an overview of the SBLCS project as a whole? Just some basic overview of what it's like.
Sure. Yeah, so it's a commentary series focused on the books of the Old Greek corpus. I think as probably many of the field of Septuagint studies know already, the thrust of this project is to elucidate the meaning of the Old Greek text as it would have been understood at its point of production, in distinction from subsequent meanings that were perceived during its subsequent reception history. So I think that's a distinctive that stands over against other projects which focus to varying degrees, perhaps more on reception history, which is a valid undertaking in and of its own right. But our focus is on the text as produced as opposed to the text as received.
Exactly, that would be the key phrase of the aspect that we're looking at, tying it very closely to the Hebrew text that the translator was working with, or our best reconstruction. What is the text as produced? Right. So very good.
This has involved, I think, a lot of interesting research that continues to go on in terms of this dynamic between the text as a translation for those books that are translated and the text as a viable Greek text. And one of the, I think, interesting things about that whole process is assessing the Greek translation in the light of contemporaneous Greek literature, non-translation literature, and some great work is being done in that area. One of the most recent publications, which I think is great, is John Lee's publication of the Greenfield lectures and his work on understanding what he calls natural Greek and the relationship between the Septuagint and natural Greek. And I think that book bears a lot of consideration, even in our work, and other research that's being done on inscriptions and documentary papyri and so on.
Yeah. So that's with the project in general. How did it end up that you are working on Genesis?
I guess I asked for it. It was one
you
of
asked
the
yourself? Yeah.
No, I didn't ask that. It was before I was involved in any sort of supervisory role.
Okay.
I remember, I think it was a meeting of the IOSCS, I forget where, but who was it? Somebody was recording, preferences or decisions that or requests that people had with respect to. I think it was Bob Kraft, actually. People were saying, I'd like this book or I'd like that book. And I said, well, I'd like Genesis. So he wrote me down. So then I ended up getting it, maybe somewhat to my surprise, but that's how it happened. And of course, then that led to Nets, first of all. That was what was taking place at that point. And then subsequently, after Nets was published, then each of the people who had worked on Nets were invited to do the commentary if they wanted to. And I think most did, but not everybody wanted to continue with commentary work. And so that's how it happened with me.
Yeah. It always makes me wish we knew presuming different translators, each of the original ones worked on which books that they did.
Right.
Um, so, how far along is Genesis then?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're pretty much finished an initial draft. That's very much a draft, and I think there still remains to be a good deal of work to prepare a final publishable version. But we've got a good start. There was a publication edited by Dirk Buchner, a monograph called the SBL Commentary and Introduction, in which a number of us provided sample commentary sections, and I did chapter 1, verse 1 to 2, verse 3 of the book of Genesis. So that's been published. There could well be some revisions that happen in the final commentary itself, but that gives us an indication of what it might look like. And then other books were sampled as well. Books of the Pentateuch, obviously, Psalter material, and other ones. So that has seen the light of day.
Yep.
And so we're looking forward to volumes being published in the series itself.
Yeah, like you said, with Genesis, hopefully you and I can get that initial draft in these coming months, but it suffices to say it's a lot of work that goes into these volumes, and
Right.
each one itself yields articles and insights as the project goes forward. So having said that, I believe that the book of Job by Claude Cox is the furthest along. Any word or updates on when this volume or any others might be published anytime soon?
Well, that's still to be determined. Yes, Claude has worked through Job in its entirety several times over the years. He submitted a complete draft, although I've not yet seen it. He put it in the mail, and it may be in my office on the university campus, which I don't visit often these days because I do all of my teaching, and most of my meetings are all online during the pandemic. So, so he has submitted a final draft. Cameron and I will need to work through it. There are various stages in the process of bringing it to the point of publication, of course, in collaboration with SBL Press, Scholars Press. I forget what they call themselves now. Yeah, that's where we are. He's certainly the farthest along of anyone at this stage. And I think one of the issues in terms of when volumes will come out is the publisher's desire that once the process start, that we have a steady sequence of volumes, not long gaps between volumes. So that's something we're going to have to work out in terms of a schedule with the publisher. We don't want to hold back volumes if at all possible, if they're ready to go. But there's also the concern from the publisher that once it starts, we need a steady production line, and we'll have to work out what that might look like.
Okay. With regard to the work itself, for those of us who are true philologists, love working with the languages and to the details, in your opinion, what's been the most stimulating and by its nature the most challenging part of working on text as produced, a commentary of this sort?
Well, yeah, I think it's been this interface, this tension perhaps at times between determining what constitutes linguistic interference from the source text and what is, as John Lee puts it, natural Greek.
Natural Greek. Yeah.
So that's the most probably intensive work that's involved, or the biggest part of the project, but it's also, I think, probably the most fascinating is to see to what degree does this translated corpus reflect the standard Greek of the period, and to what degree is it, and of course this varies from not only from book to book, but from sections of a book. There can be differences in terms of the technique that's being employed and the kind of language that is being used. So investigating that, I find the most interesting, and I'm always kind of jacked when I see how what kinds of connections there are between the language of the period and the translated text, or on the other hand, in places where it's clear that the source text has interfered. What's the nature of that? Why might that have occurred? Or what's the rationale, if we can, in fact, determine what the rationale might be? And quite frankly, at times I'm not sure. I scratch my head to say, why did you do it this way here? But the same construction or feature is rendered differently in another place in the same book. So it's yeah, I think overall we've come to appreciate, even since the days of Deisman, the linguistic competence of the translators. They weren't they were capable translators, and they knew their language. They knew the Greek very well, and for the most part, they understood the Hebrew very well. The exception is in places where they may not have, but for the most part, they were very competent translators.
Yeah, for sure. So just where this translation and all the aspects you said can bring us light on how their culture influenced them, their own mastery of the language. Because, as you said, part of my own contribution to this is trying to look at that question of how these techniques, even within the book, have changed, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really just a fascinating tension, as you say, to look at.